Well, good morning again.
Good morning.
There once was a church where the pastor and the minister of music were not getting along. And as time went by, this began to spill over in the worship service. The first week, the pastor preached on commitment and how we should all dedicate ourselves to the service of God. The music director led the song, "I Shall Not Be Moved." The second week, the pastor preached on tithing and how we should all gladly give to the work of the Lord. The director led the song, "Jesus Paid It All." The third week, the pastor preached on gossiping and how we should all watch our tongues. The music director led the song, "I Love to Tell the Story." With all this going on, the pastor became quite disgusted over the situation, and the following Sunday told the congregation that he was considering resigning. The musician led the song, "Oh, Why Not Tonight?" As it came to pass, the pastor did indeed resign. The next week he informed the church that it was Jesus who led them there, and it was Jesus who was taking him away. The music leader led the song, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." One New Year's Eve at London's Garrick Club, British dramatist Frederick Lonsdale was asked by Seymour Hicks to reconcile with a fellow member. The two had quarreled in the past and never restored their friendship. "You must," Hicks said to Lonsdale. "It is very unkind to be unfriendly at such a time. Go over now and wish him a Happy New Year." So Lonsdale crossed the room and spoke to his enemy. "I wish you a Happy New Year," he said, "but only one." Is there anybody you have trouble getting along with? I've noticed that most people have somebody who gets under their skin. Here are some clippings from the national media that interested me. And one of those good news, bad news things, school officials in Boston, mirroring a national trend, report that fighting by boys in schoolyards is down. Picking up the slack, unfortunately, are the girls, who are resorting less to name-calling and more to punch-throwing. Equal opportunity stupidity, I guess. Did you know that dueling is still legal in Paraguay, as long as both parties are registered blood donors? I guess that's socially responsible stupidity. In September 2006, Marky Meyer was convicted in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for shooting to death a man in a bar in 2004 because the man had said Meyer's dog was ugly. I suspected that this was alcohol-induced stupidity. Wouldn't it be great if we could take interpersonal hostility out of our lives? Wouldn't it be great if we could live in peace and harmony with all people? Well, Jesus tried to help us out with this problem. "If your brother or sister sins against you," said Jesus, "go and point out their fault just between the two of you, and if they listen to you, you have won them over." Think about how many arguments, conflicts, fistfights, and maybe even deaths we could all avoid if we simply followed Jesus' advice. Last weekend was Labor Day weekend, which reminded me of a labor dispute I once read about. Did you know that a few years ago a company sued a union because the union didn't go on strike? The Colonial Manor Nursing Home of Youngstown, Ohio, took the Service Employees International Union to court for not following through on the union's threat to strike. When labor negotiations between the workers and the nursing home broke down, union members authorized a strike and gave Colonial a 10-day notice of their intentions as required by federal law. The nursing home responded by spending $15,000 to recruit, interview, and train people to fill the 47 jobs it expected to be vacant from the anticipated strike. However, the union didn't go on strike. On the day the strike was supposed to begin, the union employees showed up for work, and so did the replacements. Faced with meeting the payroll for two staffs, Colonial sued the union for fraud and negligence and asked $3 million in punitive damages in addition to actual damages. The union countersued. Eventually, both sides settled their dispute at the bargaining table and dropped their lawsuits. Now that's workplace stupidity. Why can't we sit down with people who we have a grievance with and work things out before things get out of hand? Notice in Jesus' teaching, it is the person who is sinned against who takes the first step. I think what Jesus is saying to us is that who is right is sometimes not as important as maintaining communication. In the comic strip Andy Capp, the principal character is a chronically unemployed Cockney ne'er-do-well who spends most of his days playing soccer and most of his nights at the corner pub, both of which drive his long-suffering wife, Flo, up the wall. In one episode, Andy is pacing the floor while Flo stands with her arms crossed. Finally, she breaks the silence. 3 whole days without speaking. This is ridiculous. In the next frame, she says to Andy, "I'm sorry I acted the way I did. You were right. Friends?" A bit nonplussed, Andy says, "Okay, friends." Flo hugs him and gives him a kiss on the cheek. As Andy leaves the house, he meets one of his soccer buddies who says, "I heard that, Andy. It takes a good woman to apologize when she's in the wrong." As they walk down the street, Andy reflects on Chalky's remarks and replies, "It takes a better one to apologize when she's not." Now, I recognize the danger in using this example. Too many women through the years have allowed themselves to be walked on in order to maintain peace in their homes. This is unhealthy for both partners and for the marriage. Still, there are times when who's right is not as important as maintaining communication. Some years back, there was a report in the press that Turkish Airlines had fired one of their pilots and one of their co-pilots. It seems these two were flying 240 passengers from Bangkok to Istanbul when they got into a fist fight in the cockpit while arguing over the plane's altitude. It's important that we choose our battles. Endangering a plane load of passengers by fighting over who's right is irresponsible. So is endangering a marriage, or a company, or a job, or a church. Yes, sometimes it happens in church, and not only between pastors and choir directors, as in our opening story, but don't worry, we don't have that particular problem here. But it does happen all too often in churches. And no church can afford battles over what amounts to excess ego. We must choose our battles. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was imprisoned in a concentration camp. One day, a German officer walked by, and Bonhoeffer saluted him and said, "Heil Hitler." Bonhoeffer noticed that another prisoner next to him was refusing to salute, and so Bonhoeffer whispered to him, "Salute, you fool. This isn't worth dying for." Some things simply aren't worth dying for or destroying a relationship over. Now, to be clear, this is not a call for us to sweep important disagreements under the rug, but it is a call for us to confront our disagreements honestly rather than withdrawing in silence and resentment. Jackie Joyner-Kersee was one of the world's best female athletes who once held the world record in the heptathlon as a 3-time Olympic gold medalist. She and her husband, Bobby, who was also her coach, have a unique solution for discussing problems. Off the side of their house is an office which they designated the Mad Room. Whenever they have a serious disagreement, Bobby and Jackie go to the Mad Room to discuss it. Neither is allowed to leave that room until the matter is settled. What a great idea. This couple is committed to making certain their conflicts do not smolder and get out of hand. They understand that Jesus was right in warning us that who is right is sometimes not as important as maintaining communication. And that brings us to the last thing we need to see. Sometimes there is an urgency to mend fences with those who have done us wrong. There's always a danger in procrastination. There may be someone here today who needs to go immediately to someone who has hurt you and make things right. In one of the popular Chicken Soup volumes, Dennis E. Mannering tells about an assignment he once gave to a class he teaches for adults. He gave them the assignment to go to someone you love and tell them that you love them. At the beginning of the next class, one of the students began by saying, I was angry with you last week when you gave us this assignment. I didn't feel I had anyone to say those words to. But as I began driving home, my conscience started to talk. Then I knew exactly who I needed to say, I love you too. 5 years ago, my father and I had a vicious disagreement and never really resolved it. We avoided seeing each other unless we absolutely had to at family gatherings. We hardly spoke. So by the time I got home, I had convinced myself I was going to tell my father I loved him. Just making that decision seemed to lift a heavy load off my chest. At 5:30, I was at my parents' house ringing the doorbell, praying that Dad would answer the door. I was afraid if Mom answered, I would chicken out and tell her instead. But as luck would have it, Dad did answer the door. I didn't waste any time. I took one step in the door and said, Dad, I just came over to tell you that I love you. It was as if a transformation came over my dad. Before my eyes, his face softened, the wrinkles seemed to disappear, and he began to cry. He reached out and hugged me and said, I love you too, son, but I've never been able to say it. The student continued, but that's not even my point. 2 days after that visit, my dad had a heart attack and is in the hospital. I don't even know if he'll make it. So my message to all of you is this. Don't wait to do the things you know you need to do. What if I had waited to tell my dad? Take the time to do what you need to do and do it now. That's the advice that Jesus would give us. People hurt us, sometimes intentionally, sometimes without meaning to. But sometimes who is in the right and who is in the wrong is not as important as finding a common ground where the relationship can be maintained. Sometimes it means that we'll have to take the first step, even though we know that the other person is in the wrong. And the best time to take that step is today. Will you please pray with me? Lord Jesus, we have come together in your church to worship you and to prepare ourselves to serve you. Rekindle in us a desire to be a community of truth, a people who love one another enough to be honest with one another and to be forgiving of one another. Save us from stubbornness that keeps us from having true fellowship with those we are called to love. Melt our hearts of ice and strengthen us to mend our fences. We ask this in your precious name. Amen.